the lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson. Now part of the VC Family Podcast. We've got a great podcast for you. We're going to be going a little bit guest-free today as we're doing all of our conference previews and everything like that, and we'd be remiss to not recognize the independents on this podcast, which there is only one of them. So in segment number 2, we're not going to do as much of a specialized podcast or anything like that because we've only got one team to break down, but going to be taking a look at Chicago State, the landscape of them. Really hard to find a Chicago State-centric guest, which is why I'm doing this podcast all by myself, but we'll be diving in there, taking a look at some of the interesting betting trends that they had last season, getting a little bit of a lay of the land as to what to expect from them for this upcoming season. So that's going to be a lot of fun. In segment number 1, we did see a little bit that happened in college basketball over the last 24 hours. So we're going to get you guys a little bit of a roundup there. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast by that 5-star review. And Twitter is now known as X, by the way. So X is going to give it to you right there. And do also note that the conference previews, they are going to be continuing. Plan on doing the ACC tomorrow. The American will probably be done within the next 72 hours or so as well. So we've got you guys covered there. And then with regards to what we did see in college basketball on Friday, very interesting that DeJuan Clayton is going to be able to play season number 8 of college basketball. He is heading on over to the Jaspers of Manhattan. He was able to get out there on the floor for 9 games last year for Cal. And when he was out there on the floor, Cal actually looked like a completely different team. At a power conference, he was able to put up 9 points, 3 assists per contest. Once again, relatively small sample size, but that was mostly in conference play. He was able to shoot 37.5% from 3. I would say that's a little bit of an outlier. As you take a look at him throughout the entirety of his career, has been about 29.5% three-point shooter, but it's an interesting Manhattan team that we all recall a few weeks before the start of the season last year. They had the coaching overhaul. Now they are going to be looking to former Hartford coach in John Gallagher, who actually coached him for a year while he was over at Hartford. Gallagher, he left Hartford when they were one of the 2 independents last year, and they were going to be moving down to the D3 level, left pretty much the day of opening day of the college basketball season. So a little bit of an interesting circumstance there. But when it comes to this Manhattan bunch, they fought really hard. They were a nice team against the spread last season. Don't know if I necessarily have as great of expectations for them this season because they did lose a lot of their talent from a season ago, but they have done a solid job being able to bring in some guys via the portal. As no doubt about it, they get a lot of experience with regards to this pickup. The Van Wilder of college basketball himself, DeJuan Clayton, should be able to help out. Got to wonder how quickly he's going to be able to pick up the offense, but with it being Gallagher, someone that he's got familiarity with, that is going to be very big. You've got Brent Rumpel, who's coming in from St. Bonaventure, could never really find a ton of minutes there, but Briggs McLean, someone who was a teammate of his over at Hartford, he's going to be coming into the fold as well. Clearly a team that is going to be a little bit bereft of size down low, but I do think that this is going to be a Hartford bunch that is going to be an interesting watch out there in a Metro Atlantic that it's down. It's really, really down. You've got a lot of teams that lost their star players from a season ago. Like I was projecting Iona as a top 2 team with regards to my projector finish, and they're pretty much all transfers, with having Tobin Anderson, who was the star of that Fairleigh Dickinson team, as their coach, being able to bring in a bunch of solid players. But all in all, I do think that this is going to be a team that's going to be solid in the backcourt without being able to get Clayton in the fold, but do have my questions with regards to the front court. So we've got a lot of intrigue there, and we do have some intrigue with regards to Chicago State, a team that was able to make you some money last year. They're the lone independent in college basketball, and we try to serve up a little bit of everything for everyone, and it doesn't matter if you're betting on the ACC, if you're betting on the games in the Atlantic 10, or if you're betting on Chicago State games, there's always money to be made. So coming up next, we are going to give you guys a little bit of a preview for Chicago State, what to expect out of them moving forward, and what some of the betting trends and the style of Chicago State is. That's up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VC Family Podcast.
Are you ready to become a winning sports bettor? Schedule a call with SBIA to find out how their service can make you a long-term winning player. They've developed an innovative algorithm that maximizes units return, and they are so confident in their system that they offer a money-back guarantee. Sign up by October 31st and get their MBA package at no cost until they reach 10 net units. They treat sports betting like a business. So if you want to learn how to make your sports betting dreams a reality, visit them at SBIA1.com and check them out on social media at SBIA Sports.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Pets Guest Seats with myself, Greg Apes Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, keeping it guest-free today, as this is pretty much our conference preview edition of every single independent team, as last year we did have two of them with Hartford along with Chicago State. Now we're down to one, and I will say this before I give you the preview of Chicago State. There might be some books out there that do provide some of these D1 versus non-Division I games, like when you have like Division II West Florida playing against insert your Division I team there. These are games I just typically cannot handicap because typically they're not up on the Vegas betting board. Sometimes you'll find like a very, very special like offshore, sometimes a FanDuel line on that, but these are not games that I'm personally going to be handicapping unless if it is listed up on the Vegas betting board. Now, Chaminade, typically when their games are played in the Maui Invitational, I am able to do so. Maui Invitational now going to be held on the campus of Hawaii over at the San Sheriff Center, so I do anticipate being able to give you guys a little bit on those, but certainly when it comes to the D1 versus non-D1 games, not going to be able to do as much on that front, but certainly with regards to Chicago State games, we're going to have you guys covered there. And with the Chicago State team, they were actually a relatively solid against the spread wagon last year, especially towards the back half of the season as well. They were able to dominate their matchups against Hartford as they went 100% against the spread in conference play, which if you take a look at conference play, once again, there were two independents last year, so that's not necessarily saying a whole heck of a lot, but with Chicago State, I did like what I found from them towards the back half of the season last year, and they do return quite a bit of the talent that they had a season ago from a team that, against the spread, you know what, they were able to do a solid job being able to cover right around 59% of their games. They went 16-11 against the spread. They had to deal with a lot of travel, and still, when they were hitting the road, they still went 12-11 against the spread, as this is pretty much a modern-day form of a barnstorming team, as if you take a look at the schedule that they've got on tap for the 2023-24 season, they're going to be going through it quite a bit once again. They did actually land themselves in the Cancun Challenge, so they are going to have some ease there when it comes to the month of November, taking on, for sure, Northern Colorado, Southern Illinois, and then they get a little bit of a TBD matchup, and it did feel like they scaled back just a little bit with regards to some of the competition towards the month of February. And do keep in mind as well, Chicago State might pick up a few games towards the back half of the season as well. I recall they played Gonzaga in like very early March, as Gonzaga knew that they were going to be in pretty much the Final Four of the WCC tournament, so they played them as a little bit of a tune-up because right now their last game is going to be against Indiana University of Northwest in February, and their last game against a Division I team is going to be East Carolina. That's on the 14th of February, but I do think that they are going to be able to add a few teams moving forward, but they do challenge themselves quite a bit out of conference, as from, I would say, late December on, it really does get to be murderer's row, as Northwestern is the team that they have to play on the 13th of December, and then from there they have to play against Wisconsin on the 22nd in Madison. They play DePaul on December 30th, and then January 2nd and 3rd, a nice back-to-back playing against Kansas State and Oklahoma State, and they are going to be finding themselves in some of these quirky back-to-back spots. You do find teams that are trying to be able to build a little bit of a budget, and Chicago State, they are looking to get into a conference. I know that they are trying to build a football team to be able to get into a conference. That's a big reason why a conference like the MEAC, something like that, did not pick them up this offseason, so they're looking to build funds in any way possible, which is why they are going to be playing so many of these wonky road games. But when it comes to Chicago State, in times where they didn't have a lot of rest, they were actually fine with only 1 day of a rest. They actually went 6-3 against the spread, which I do find that to be a little bit intriguing. I don't know if they had any games where they didn't have any rest whatsoever last year. It's very rare to find that, and they do have at the very least that one back-to-back spot against the two Big 12 opponents this season, but that is going to be something to be gauging with the Chicago State team. But if you take a look at the actual team itself, not the world's worst roster, as they've got a few guys that were former top 250 recruits in there. Wesley Cardit is really the biggest of them. Wesley Cardit was a top 150 guy back when Gerald Gillen, he is the current coach of the team. He was over at Sam Amford, but I believe that ESPN might have even had them in the top 100. When he was at Samford during the 2021-22 season, he was averaging right around 8 points per contest at Samford. Decided to follow his coach in Gerald Gillen, and last year put up 16.5 points, shot 34.5% from three-point range, and this is going to be the guy that Chicago State is going to be looking to build around, especially with him really being able to play some of his best towards the back half of the season last year as well, because he had 11 plus points in each of the team's final 17 games last year in that stretch, scoring 17.8 points with about 3.5 assists, 5 boards. Did turn the ball over a little bit much with 32% three-point shooting, but all in all, he did a very solid job with this team, so they're going to be returning him from a season ago. They bring in someone like Kendrick Green, who's going to be able to help out in the backcourt as well. I know that DeJuan Charles is someone that returns from a season ago, and if they're able to get A.J. Neal clicking, I think that this could be a little bit of a upside get for them as well, because A.J. Neal is one of those guys that was a former top 150 recruit, just really couldn't get out there on the floor last year, and when he was a freshman at Long Beach State, only played for about 16 or so games. He was able to put in there right around 2 points per contest, as he had to really be able to reach his potential. A little bit of a loss year last year for him, but I do think that these are guys that are going to be relatively solid. They bring in an LIU transfer in Noble Crawford as well, and then Deshaun Corbett, really your main rebounder last season as a 6'7", little bit of a Swiss Army knife, do everything guy down low for this bunch. He had very solid results, being able to give you 12.5 points, was able to do a good job on the glass, so I look at him as being a relatively good upside guy for the Chicago State team. And for Chicago State, I do think that they're going to be able to catch a few teams that are going to be napping a little bit. They used to be a big giant punchline, and I used to be someone that very much was pro-fade Chicago State for so long. I don't think that that's going to be the case as much this season. I do think that they're going to be able to provide some relatively solid results. I do think that they're going to be a little bit more of a tough out, as Gerald Gillen has really been able to turn things over with the Chicago State team. And if you do look at the style of play that Chicago State was playing with last year, it was a little bit more in control, and it felt like they were able to finally unearth an identity, because the biggest thing for Chicago State for all those years where they were just trying to find, whether that be a solid coach, whether that be just anything whatsoever, is that they would go from like playing super fast, super slow. They would get into the vector where they'd be just going with another team's style. They'd be a fish out of water with that regard. Now for Chicago State, it feels like they've been able to reel it in a little bit more, and they have found out who they are. With Chicago State, they were 300th in the country last year with regards to total possessions per game, right around 299th, and you can tell that at home they were really dialing things back a little bit as well. They only had about 66 possessions per game in their home games last season, so when they were playing against outmatched competition, they were willing to play it a little bit more slowly. When they're a little bit out of sorts, that's when they do get sped up just a tad bit more. But this is a Chicago State team that they are going to be looking to play a little bit more of a balanced style. They're a team that they have some relatively okay three-point shooting, and they're not going to rely completely on three-point shooting, but at the same time, they're going to be looking to be balanced on that front. They were about 195th in the country last season with regards to three-point shooting percentage. Biggest thing that they do need to work on is the turnovers. I was mentioning it when I was highlighting Mr. Cardit, the fact that he did have right around 3 turnovers per contest last season, and they do lose one of their better scorers from last year in Elijah Weaver, a former top 100 recruit in his own right back when he was over at USC along with Dayton. He was able to put in there 12.5 points, gave out 3.5 assists per contest, but he too had right around about 2.8 turnovers per contest. I think that might be a little bit of a addition by subtraction, and if you're able to get Gene Charles, who I was mentioning a little bit before, out there on the floor, he should be able to help in the backcourt as well. Not a guy that is necessarily going to be doling out the ball. That's a little bit more of Kendrick Green's role. I think that he's going to be sliding in to where Weaver was last season, as in a little bit more of a reserve role. He was able to give out 2 assists per contest, but with Gene Charles in the limited 12 games game sample size that we did see from him last year, he was able to put in there right around 6.5 points per contest, and prior to him going down with injury in late December, he was getting better and better. In his final 9 games played, was averaging more like 7.5 points per contest. Once again, not a great three-point shooter. You're going to be looking a lot more to someone like a Carded to be able to help out on that front. Would not surprise me as well if you see a little bit more from Tashandre Cole, a little bit more down low as well. He was able to give you 4.3 rebounds per game when he was able to see minutes. He stands right in the neighborhood of about 6'5", 6'6", a little bit of an undersized big man at Chicago State in general. A little bit of an undersized team. They don't have anyone north of 6'9" that has seen any meaningful playing time in a college basketball game. But all in all, for Chicago State, I do think that the arrow is pointing upward, and I do think that you're going to be able to extract a few coins. If you do take a look at Chicago State, they typically catch some very big numbers because a lot of people are like, oh, Chicago State, they're an independent and everything like that. They think back to what Chicago State was back when they were in the WAC, and they were just getting waxed when they were out there in the WAC. But Gerald Gillen has been able to do a solid job with this program. So I think that they're going to be an interesting team to be able to gauge moving forward. And they are both number 1 and dead last in my projector or finish among independents. So we are able to make that distinction, and now wrap things up for a little bit of a shorter edition of Coast to Coast Hoops. Now part of the VC Family Podcast. Felt like I need to do this one because we are doing all these conference previews. You're going to be getting the ACC and the American within the next 72 hours on this podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @Unit_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, naming does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way, that's fine, an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast behind that 5-star review. Always appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast during the offseason, give you guys news and notes of college basketball along with these conference previews. In this case, the lone independent preview that we are going to be able to do. And then once we get in season, picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So appreciate you guys tuning in today. I'll be back with you once again tomorrow with the ACC Conference Preview Edition. Thank you so much.